we're gonna.
Oh, wait,
there
broadcast.
We go.
Broadcast.
Okay, so we're broadcasting, we're recording, and then Elka, you're gonna put this on
It's on
Facebook
now.
or Luisa.
Yep.
All right, good morning, everyone, to the Manhattan Borough Board for the month of April. This is for Borough Board, this will be our second month transmitting live on Facebook, and will be updated on YouTube through Zoom, a virtual meeting of our Manhattan Borough Board. So to those of you who are calling in by phone and as a panelist, you can dial *6 to unmute and *9 to raise your hand. So if you're calling in by phone as a panelist, *9 to raise your hand, *6 to unmute. For those of you who are panelists by camera, you can unmute yourself at this point and then mute yourself back when you finish speaking so that we don't hear any background noise. So we're going to begin with accepting the agenda for today. So last night you were mailed, and last week also you were emailed the agenda for today as well as the minutes. But then last night, Rosie Mendez, the Director of Community Affairs, also emailed somewhat of a discussion script or style sheet in terms of the kind of things we will be discussing that the Borough President Gail Brewer would like to discuss with all the community board and council members. The reimagining and reopening Manhattan, and what are the possibilities and challenges that await us in that regard. So without further ado, if we can have a motion to approve the May Borough Board agenda.
So
Motion
moved.
to approve.
Second.
Okay. So we have a later motion to approve, and then do we have a second?
Second.
Second.
Okay, we have 2 seconds, Mark and Lowe. And all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? Hearing none, motion passes. We have the agenda adopted. Next, we have approval and adoption of the minutes from April's Borough Board. So April's Borough Board, you got both minutes and you received the transcript of what happened in the chat room. Unlike Vegas, what happens in the chat room doesn't stay in the chat room. It gets distributed broadly and widely for all to consume. So do we have a motion? First of all, are there any corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, so do we have a motion to adopt the minutes, to approve the minutes of April's Borough Board?
So
Motion
moved.
to approve.
Okay, so I have a so moved. I heard Mark Diller first, so moved. And then second by Leila. I
Second.
take that as a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, motion passes. So for the first part of this, I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, Borough President Gail Brewer, I think for the first part, if we can have a quick report out from the chairs of like the 3 things they want our office to know in terms of what's been happening in their board, any resolutions you'd like to bring to our attention, any kind of concerns. And then after the borough chair reports, for the Borough President's report, the Borough President will have a report, but then as part of the Borough President report, she would like to lead a discussion around the recommendations, suggestions, opinions of community board chairs around reimagining and reopening, in particular around small businesses, restaurants, sidewalk seating, public seating, and the like, in terms of bringing back that particular very important and critical sector in our borough's economy. So that would be Gail Brewer, then followed by council member updates, and then we'll conclude. So is that fair? Okay. So first we'll begin with Anthony Notaro for your chair update, hitting the 3 main points that you'd like us to know.
Thank you, Alden, and good to see everyone, even virtually. The 3 top items that CB1 would like to report on. Last night at our executive committee, we basically passed a resolution which will go to our full board next week about supporting the move from, or this proposal from the Hudson River Park Trust Advisory Council and CB2 and CB4 to take over part of Route 9A, the westernmost wing. So that will relieve pressure on heavy use at the park and allow people to enjoy being out there, but still being able to socially distance. So I know we'll continue to work on that. The number 2 item, what we did bring on, thanks to Rosie and Andrew, we have 5 new members, a very diverse group, from a high school student at Millennium in our district, and even a small business owner. So last night we had an orientation for them, and we're very excited to have them. They're already starting to work on their respective committees. And the final item is we have just started to hear, and we're going to start to work on the whole idea of the street seats expansion. There's obviously a lot of support in our district for small businesses, but some time ago when the street seats were first introduced, there was some pushback from many of our members and public about public space being taken over by private enterprise. I think those 2 items can be reconciled now, but we're just starting down that road. That's it for the top 3. Thanks, Alden.
Thank you. Thank you. Community Board 2.
Hi guys, Carter Booth.
All right, I'll call back on Community Board. Community Board.
Can you hear me?
Okay, there we go. Yes. Actually, Carter, we can't hear you. Carter, we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Now
Yes.
we can.
Okay. So Anthony grabbed one of my 3 items, which is we've been advocating for the Hudson River Park Trust to close the westernmost lane of West Street, Route 9A. I think he covered that pretty thoroughly. As far as open streets, Community Board 2 to date has only had 2 streets closed, but we're looking forward this weekend to having University Place closed in its entirety, and a portion of McDougal Street west of Washington Square Park. That's the Village Alliance and the Washington Square Park Conservancy are going to be organizing that. We also have a number of community groups that have applied but have not yet received feedback yet on their applications. So I'm hoping in the next few weeks that they'll start processing those applications and approving them. And that's for the open streets. And third item is for us, which is important, is we formed a working group to submit recommendations on criteria for outdoor dining. I think Community Board 2 has the highest number of sidewalk cafes in the city, and we certainly have one of the highest liquor license densities, and that's really important to us to help our local businesses reopen at some point, and particularly with the outdoor dining. We really want to look at this in a very encompassing way, and maybe some non-traditional ways to help sort of bridge that time period through the end of the outdoor dining season this year. We've been working with the government relations folks and the general counsel at the Hospitality Alliance and with the Speaker's Office. So that's something that we're hoping will move forward in the coming weeks. And that was 3 items. Thanks.
Thank you, Carter. Community Board 3.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Alden.
Morning.
So I'll save my spiel for how COVID-19 has been devastating our district for another time, and leave it to the 3 things that our board has really been focusing on. So we only had 4 committees meet this month: Landmarks, SLA, Transportation, and Land Use. And next week is our full board meeting, and some of the resolutions that were passed at committee that will be going in front of our full board is related to a lot of what's been talked about already. Our support of safe streets. We sent in a resolution with a long list of suggested streets that were taken from community engagement efforts that we made for possible future closures of those streets. There's another resolution going to the full board in relationship to the expansion of the street seats program that we've talked about already. There's some concerns around compliance enforcement around that issue and keeping social distancing practices in place while we continue to expand the street seat program. And then probably our biggest issue at committee this month was in land use, and that is the future of 70 Mulberry Street, which is a building in Chinatown that was devastated by a fire that the city has now marked for complete demolition. And that building has housed many nonprofits in the Chinatown neighborhood. So there was a very heavy attendance at that meeting, over 130 people on our Zoom meeting for that. Various opinions about demolition versus restoration. So I think that that will continue to be a item that we are looking at that committee. We also got 6 new members. We're holding our orientation on Sunday for them. We hope Gail can attend it. We sent her information on that. And finally, our biggest issue really right now with everything is bars in the East Village and Hell Square area of the Lower East Side are not complying with current rules and regulations. And they're selling alcohol in open containers. They are allowing gatherings outside of their bars where people aren't wearing masks, where there's not social distancing. We've gone to the police for enforcement, and we've been told that they've been instructed not to get involved due to highly publicized encounters in the past. As most of you know, there's some video that surfaced. The police are now referring to that incident as the slapping on Avenue D, which if you watch the video, it was a lot more than a slapping. But those are the top 3 things that we're dealing with in CB3.
Thank you. Thank you for that update. CB4?
I'm going to keep this to one issue because it's a big deal for us, because we've had problems on West 51st Street and West 52nd Street with a couple of shelters and supportive housing that have been problematic. There are certain residents, supportive housing, that we can't, do anything about for the most part. And the neighbors on those 2 blocks have been up in arms about it. Well, last Friday, unbeknownst to us, with no advance warning, the Department of Homeless Services moved 143 men into a hotel on West 51st Street from 2 shelters in the East Village. If they could have picked any block in the entire country not to move those shelters onto, that was it, because we're now sitting on a powder keg. We have the NYPD station 24/7 on the block. We've increased, the provider at the hotel seems to be okay. It's Project Renewal. They now have 10 security guards on staff 24/7, and there are still problems on the block. Project Renewal looked at the hotel last Tuesday. They started moving the clients in at Friday at 9 a.m. and we were not notified, and the councilman's office was not notified until noon on Friday. The Housing, Health, and Human Services Committee is going to take this up tonight. I am expecting them to report out a letter to everyone and their mother, basically saying you have to move these 143 men, find another hotel, because this block cannot support it.
Lowell, is that Lantern?
No, they moved into the hotel next door to Lantern, Gail.
Yeah, but Lantern is not my favorite nonprofit.
No, Lantern is a disaster on that block to begin with.
There's disaster everywhere.
Yeah, Lantern's there. Wynn is across the street, and now they moved 143 men with, chemical abuse problems into the WJ Hotel next door to Lantern. Yeah. And the block is a powder keg ready to explode.
Yeah.
Thank you for that update, Lo. CB5, Vicky.
Good morning. Good morning. I hope you're all well and staying safe. Following our virtual exec meeting this month, CB5 welcomed its 8 new board members by holding a mini orientation to assign mentors to go over the basics of being a board member. Committee assignments were made, and we are so impressed and looking forward to working with new members. We also have a 16-year-old whose application just blew us away. He sounds fabulous. We thank Gail and the Borough President's office for the new additions. We held a second full board meeting, starting with the introductions of the new members and then followed by action items, including the Central Park Conservancy's restoration project involving the conservatory garden and the dairy access path. Kind of very nice thing to deal with in the midst of all this craziness. But that brings me to what we're dealing with. And I think as a number one issue, we all know that the mayor established several advisory councils to help the city reopen and recover from the coronavirus pandemic. And we also know that these advisory councils include small businesses, large businesses, labor and workforce development, art and culture, and so on. And the councils range in size from roughly 24 to 43 members who represent a wide variety of organizations in the city. Unfortunately, not one representative from any of the 12 community boards in Manhattan was asked to provide a representative. And since CB5 and a few other boards cover a huge portion of the city's business community, it would have made sense for us to have had representation on the councils. We believe it's indefensible that community board input was not included nor sought, and our committees are responding in full force this month. So whether the mayor wants our input or not, CB5 definitely plans to give it to him. The committees of CB5 are each meeting to discuss and address New York City during COVID and post-COVID. So to give you an idea, I want to quickly go through what all of the committees are doing. They are really, really into this month and very upset over the fact that there is no community board or community input on those councils. So the Land Use Committee has outlined its discussion rate post-pandemic New York City and our district, and we'll be brainstorming to determine what our priorities are and what solutions we believe should be implemented by exploring the following themes. 1, a resilient city is a well-planned city. How will we plan for resilience? We plan by wide and robust access to core services, especially hospitals. We must be wisely dense. Today, CB5's overall residential vacancy rate is at 16%, with Midtown at 30% and the Billionaires Row at 40%. This was taken from the census. We cannot build for emptiness, and we must protect our parks, in addition, more than ever, including going against the shadows. The tax revenue will be scarce. Private partnerships can help by developing and integrating new funding mechanisms and new partnerships to fund our new infrastructure requirements. We have to strongly and systematically use the existing tools to increase private involvement in public realm and infrastructure development. We need to increase the tax base for low base tax rate for super tolls on Billionaires Row. 3, tax revenue is scarce and money should be spent carefully and smartly in the coming decade by developing a necessary 10-year plan. Our district cannot revert to letting its future be determined by market forces. The city must plan. The impact on residential neighborhoods, it's important that they remain attractive, and planning needs to be done with human scale and quality of life in mind. And finally, the committee will discuss the impact on commercial office neighborhoods by supporting commercial landlords and planning with safety in mind. The following 3 committees are meeting jointly on issues that are really of importance to us. So the 3 committees are Transportation and Environment, which is addressing DOT's update on temporary dedicated bike lanes on 38th and 39th Streets, and also the effects on the district during and after COVID-19, including street openings. Parks and public spaces, which covered sidewalks, cafes, pedestrian traffic, and public plazas, will address the current and subsequent effects of COVID as well. Public safety, quality of life, which basically deals with liquor licenses, has invited the New York City Hospitality Alliance to present their proposal to use streets, either an entire street or possibly just a lane of traffic, plazas, parks, and other open spaces for open street dining. We've seen the same concerns regarding the open the alcohol to go rule. And so in addition, the committee will make recommendations regarding current alcoholic beverage to go rules by the New York State Liquor Authority during pause while bars and restaurants are shut down, and will also address the possible proposal by legislators to extend the permission during or post-pause. It's been a real problem. We have heard that, well, we know the law is that they must be serving food along with whatever drinks people are ordering, but that's not happening. So we're seeing the same thing. We're seeing congregation on the street, drinking, no food, no masks, and certainly not social distancing. Lastly, our BEX, Budget, Education, and City Services Committee has a super full agenda that they will be meeting that I'd like to very quickly just let everybody know. Some of it applies to the things that you're concerned with. So they're doing a consideration of the CORE Act again, which would mandate 3 composting drop-off sites in each community, along with the provision for collecting of electronic recyclables, and that cannot be collected in our general waste stream. There's the letter to elected supporting the Borough President's push for a social worker in every school. We passed a reso recommending that DOT investigate the funding and pursue the goal back in January, but given the impact of the coronavirus on the mental health of everyone, and particularly students, we wish to revisit. We're discussing small businesses and economic development, bringing in ideas to encourage small business to continue their presence in New York, ideas about what to do with empty storefronts and businesses facing financial difficulties within our district. It's particularly important given the commercial tilt of CB5. We also would like to understand the impact of the current situation on the arts and the nonprofits delivering myriad of services, and figure out how our board can support these sectors to ensure that they do not wither and die. Street homelessness, what it looks like in our district now, learning whether or not city plans on easing people out of temporary hotels or moving them into other accommodations, understanding how the bids and community members view the current situation. We want to investigate all the services being provided to the homeless in our district, the impact, whether good or bad, and whether some of the services will be continued, like showers and bathrooms. We have been included in the community court and Midtown South efforts in this regard. We wrote to our electeds supporting the continuation of the funding of the summer youth program, and will continue to think about ways that youth can have jobs that are meaningful and virtual, such as programming or scanning LPC documents and photos so that they are searchable. And we are aware of the city movement to withhold rent and want to understand what housing looks like. Are people paying rent? Can they afford to pay rent? And what the impact will be on landlords and ultimate property taxes in our district. CB5 is one of the areas where many people left during the pandemic, and we want to first understand who is coming back, who is not, and what that might mean for our district, and then how our board might help if this becomes an issue. So clearly all the committee's work that has been set in motion is part of an effort to be as proactive as possible with respect to the city's advisory councils. And it's our wish to have community boards, community's voices heard.
Thank you for that, Vicki. There's a lot there.
I know, I'm sorry. I couldn't break it down anymore.
That helps frame a lot of the conversation that Gail wants to have in terms of what reopening it looks like. And you raised a lot, you helped frame it. That was like you had 3 points, but you had 3 points for every 3 points. And there's one thing though, in terms of the different task forces that the mayor mentioned, that it's unconscionable that there's no community board representation on these, and you're going to have a resolution, you said, on that?
Yes, absolutely.
So there's appetite for other community boards to maybe, well, if the Borough President's office, I'm sure, wants to echo that sentiment, and we'll do so either in a letter combined with the 12 resolutions, or we can have a letter also signed by the 12 community board chairs, assuming they feel the same.
I'm sure they do. And you know, my pitch is always strength in numbers. So I think we should all be a part of it. Definitely.
Because Gail has mentioned that in the past too, that the fact that who are these people on these like umpteen number of commissions?
Oh, you take a look at that list.
Who they represent, who are they accountable to, who do they report back to? And the
Right.
community board seems to us should be a hub of this activity and of report back and of accountability. Community Board 6, we've just been joined by Asia Badi. So Community Board 6, Asia, if you could give the top 3 main headlines or takeouts or updates from your community board.
Sure. I very briefly. We just recently put a resolution regarding open streets and our recommendations for where those should be, and that was in our last full board meeting. Secondly, we're also partnering with CB8 around how businesses should open and how we can support them. And I think both that open streets project as well as the small business openings and the ideas around utilizing possibly the open streets as potential expansions of restaurants is really important and something we really want to think through. And finally, thank you very much for our new members. We are mentoring them and getting them on board. So that's it for us.
Thank you, Asia. And we're going to have a discussion about the open streets, open space, restaurants, and seating after the community board chair updates.
Great.
Thank you. Community Board 7, Mark Diller.
Good morning, everyone. I apologize for my gruesome appearance. The Hudson River Greenway and I had a disagreement about which end of my bicycle was up. For my three high points, the first is going to be a very similar item. We are convening a special meeting of our, we're convening a special meeting next Wednesday at 6:30 to talk about open space for restaurants and to try to reimagine how we're going to allow restaurants to try to overcome what is an unsustainable expected capacity limitation that we think the governor will impose. And I have an embarrassment of riches for which I thank the Borough President's office and the council members because I have Andrew Ridgey as my first vice president. Obviously, he's a leader on this issue throughout the city. Doug Kleiman is my second vice president, and he is an expert on leasing. Our Business and Consumer Issues Committee is going to lead the fight, but I'm delighted to say that every one of my committees wants to be the leader on this issue. Even down to the Youth and Education and Libraries Committee. So everybody wants in. We're going to hope to have a good conversation and get as detailed but as workable a resolution out of that in time for our June full board meeting. Obviously, we're not going to get down to, we'll put it in this block, but not on that block. But that's our goal. And we're grateful for all the support that we're getting on that issue. That's probably the most important issue that we're confronting right now. And if we read the tea leaves of timing correctly, that the restaurants may be looking at some manner of reopening, and I use that word in quotes, in the early part of July, then having this planning now so that we can then be a part of the planning in the more granular level in June is necessary so that we can all move forward on that basis. Other things that we're working on, there's more than 2 more. I'll just hit 2 quickly. One is that in the midst of all this, we have been promised any number of degrees of pain with respect to the state and the city budget. I know that the city budget is under discussion right now, and the state budget, while having been adopted, is I believe being in the process of revamped and revised because of the zeros that are appearing in the revenue stream. We are trying to modify our district needs statement and our budget priorities to be neither tone deaf to the reality of the pain that's coming, but neither be a patsy about the things that we care and are deeply concerned about. And then the third point that I'll raise and touch on hopefully somewhat briefly, and in that regard, education, the MTA, and the ability to continue to address food insecurity are huge issues that we want to be in some way involved with, although some of them are a little beyond the power of a community board. The last issue that I'll bring very briefly to mind is the ongoing issue that we never want to lose track of, which is the 40 billion and counting hole that NYCHA finds itself in. We had a wonderful presentation for the second time last night from the Regional Plan Association about one way to try to solve the conundrum of NYCHA funding. there needs to be others. There need to be more creative solutions. Obviously, there are short-term, middle-term, and long-term problems at NYCHA. Food insecurity in the Borough President's office and various not-for-profits in our district have been wonderful in trying to start start to address those issues. But we can't lose track of the long term because, as somebody said last night, every year that we defer maintenance adds another billion or so to the budget or to the price tag. So open space for restaurants, realistic planning for the budget, and trying to keep trying not to lose track of NYCHA while all the rest of these things are going on are the three most pressing issues that we're trying to deal with. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mark. CB8, Alita.
Oh, what happened?
Okay, you're unmuted now.
I know.
Okay.
We have our new members. We have orientation with them. I've assigned them to mentors, and they joined us at our full board meeting last night. They're all very enthusiastic, so thank you so much. They're a quite interesting and diverse group of people. We are planning, as Asia mentioned, a program called Restarting Our Neighborhood Small Businesses. It will be a series of 1-hour evenings starting June 4th at 6:30. The first one will be on health and safety issues. We have the commanding officer from the Central Park Precinct, a public health guy, and a lawyer trying to line up on that. And then we'll follow it with legal and financial issues, something about community support, small businesses, and then a specific program for retail and a specific program for restaurants. We're working with the BIDS, Carnegie Hill Neighbors, the street associations, and CB6 to do that. And we also want to tackle how New York City could be reimagined and made better, as well as the things that have gone wrong. I personally am affronted by the Samaritan's Oath that was required, and we'd like to have that could be avoided. With us tonight at the full board meeting, some issue of having all of our meetings forever be virtual in nature. I don't know if as an option to be with person meeting, but that's something that we're going to take up at a separate board meeting at some point, I think July. We're also concerned about the outdoor behavior. We've asked that, or I've contacted the city council members, asked if there could be something so that alcohol is for delivery and not so much to go, because the police were called for a restaurant that had nothing outside, needless to say, no masks, no social distancing. We're really concerned about the census because a lot of people from CB have left city, and our number, particularly on Park Avenue, Fifth Avenue, Madison, are very low. We don't have to reach people, and we need to get those numbers up. I understand for every person who doesn't respond, it's a loss of $1,000 to the state. So that's really concerning. We signed letter, we just had full board. I'd rather not wait. We'll sign any kind of letter to get anyone, community boards and communities on city councils doing plan. Other than that, I've also been advised by a lot for construction companies that there is going to be a lot of after-hour variances as construction goes, and that's number one in Cuomo's priority for a neighborhood that is construction and development fatigued. Having after home, having after hours variances that basically give 6 hours off is just too much. So that hasn't come up. And as far as the outdoor streets using for restaurants and cafes, the Transportation Committee in conjunction with the Small Business Committee will be having that on the agenda for the first day in June. Thank you. Sorry, that was more than thank you.
No, thank you. And as I mentioned, we have our whole land use team onboarded now at the Borough President's office, and they're observing this meeting, and they'll be introduced to you shortly. Next, we have Community Board 9, Barry Weinberg.
Hi, everyone. I want to echo what Mark Diller said in terms of what we're dealing with in our priorities. We are spending a lot of time focusing on NYCHA and on, in addition to the food insecurity issues and the lack of PPE there, you know, preparing for what happens when the eviction moratorium is over. And if you have people who have moved in to take care of a loved one in NYCHA and those those new people aren't on the lease, that can cause problems. If folks pass away who are on the lease, and there are people living there who are not on the lease, that can also cause problems. So really preparing for that is something that we're spending a lot of time thinking about and talking. We're also dealing with service cuts more broadly, not just at NYCHA. So the Youth Education and Libraries Committee has been very focused on both pushing for a virtual remote summer youth employment program this year, as well as fighting specific cuts from the Department of Education. While we are mindful of the budget crisis the city is in, you know, we have previously been on record, even before the pandemic, on the need for additional sources of revenue at the state and city level. And we are in contact with our federal representatives, urging them to support and push through aid to states and municipalities to help soften some of these budget pressures. We have also been, providing some feedback on open streets that we can open, and we're fairly happy with the way that's progressing. We know from studies that only of the contact traced transmissions in the world, only 0.3% came from an outdoor space. And so we really think that, you know, keeping people outdoors is key, and obviously they should stay 6 feet apart and wear masks, but the more, you know, you can reduce the amount of time people are spending in enclosed public spaces, you reduce the risk of transmission. Our housing committee has been very active in both advocating to our state electeds for assistance to renters and homeowners, and also in particular, they are working with Senator Julia Salazar and our Senator Robert Jackson to modify one of the proposed bills for housing assistance, which had previously included the requirement that any HDFCs receiving assistance under the bill sign a 40-year regulatory agreement, and no other entity, private landlord, private cooperative, homeowner, renter, had to sign away their rights for 40 years if they received assistance. So they're working to change that. We have some of the highest concentration of HDFCs in the state in our board area. And then finally, we are very much nearing completion, I believe, of our process with the City Council's Land Use Division on a draft proposed rezoning of Morningside Heights. We are not doing the drafting, but we are providing feedback to the City Council Land Use Division on their proposal. And while it is not perfect, we have desperately wanted to rezone Morningside Heights for 30 years. And the Department of City Planning has repeatedly told us no, and the Borough President's office and the City Council Land Use Division are charting new ground forward in doing a neighborhood rezoning proposal that does not originate with the Department of City Planning or EDC. So we are hopeful to really begin that process moving forward in the coming weeks, really. And I just want to thank again CB7 folks and Mark Diller for their advocacy on NYCHA and their feedback in that rezoning process as well. And thank the Borough President's office for their support they've provided, as well as our wonderful new members. We have 4 new members joining us, one of whom is an undergraduate student at Columbia, and they are all fantastic people. And one of whom is also a public member who has just been regularly attending meetings anyways. So we love that because we know there won't be any attendance issues. But I think that'll be enough from me and from CB9, and it's good to see everybody.
Thank you, Barry. Community Board Chair, Cicely Harris, Community Board Chair.
No, Aldrin, she's asked that she have her report delivered after CB12. She's
Okay.
on a work call, but she'll come back on.
Excellent, thank you. Community Board 11, I don't think I see Nilsa. Nilsa Rama? Is Nilsa on? Is there the Vice Chair from CB11?
Hi, Aldrin. This is Xavier. I believe Nilsa is on. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Oh, okay, Nilsa. Sorry about that. I didn't see. It was just your name, just your number comes up.
Yeah, I was muted, so Xavier can feel free to chime in after I report. Xavier, why don't you first mention the housing forum that will be taking place May 27th, and then I'll just give a general update.
Yes, thank you so much, Nilsa. It's good to see everyone. Sorry, I'm got my my son using my my iPad Pro, so I'm just I've dialed in and the camera has not been functioning on my iPhone. So real quick, we do have a housing forum that's coming up that's going to be helmed by Jeremiah Schlittman, our housing chair. It's Wednesday, May 27th at 6:30 p.m. We're going to have a bunch of electeds on, and we're going to be dealing with a whole host of issues. And so I encourage all of you to disseminate the information of that event. I also want to congratulate Connor Allerton, the 11's planning fellow, for his recent addition to the BP's land use team. The staff really enjoyed working with Connor this year, and we're all very excited for him. And a little final note, we've been working with the Statement of District Needs and Budget Committee. We've just got a drafted letter that's going to be voted on tonight at Executive Committee. And it's a very robust response to the executive budget. We put in a lot of hours, as has Carly Wine, who you know in our office. And I want to just say that we need to band together with the budget cuts that are coming down, and realize that our community, and especially in our community, is being impacted most severely by these budget cuts. I think we're advocating for all of Manhattan, but if you look at it and the ratio, especially as it deals with SYEP and how it's going to affect our youth. So those are some of the highlights I wanted to bring to the table, and I'm just going to pass it back to Nilsa. Thank you so much, Nilsa, for allowing me to speak. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Stay well.
No, absolutely. You know, I'm really grateful for Xavier. He's a very, very capable vice chair, and I'm glad that he stepped in when I was having issues trying to join in. So at Community Board 11, we've been having, you know, we have some sites where we actually give out food for the, you know, as one of the programs for food insecurity. So one of the things that we've been really, really concerned with is the SYP. We signed on to a letter last month, and this month we've done our own resolution regarding the urging of the restoration of SYEP funds. Our land use committees, as well as other committees, are also concerned with the open space, opening up the open streets and ensuring that that is navigated properly. We have one organization that is interested in the open streets concept, but it is onerous, as the not-for-profit who signs on needs to make sure that, one, they have staff available and have the resources. So at this point in time with COVID, it has been difficult to assess who's interested in doing the open street initiative. One major concern is the small businesses in East Harlem. A lot of them were not able to participate in the PPP program in the second round. Some have applied. A couple have expressed that they have been selected for that program, so we're happy about that, but we're concerned about when these businesses opened up and any restrictions that obviously will follow, the decimation of the small businesses in East Harlem and how we can prop them up. A major concern, it's an ongoing concern, I believe, for all our community boards, is the street homeless. We are seeing an uptick in encampments because since a lot of the businesses are closed and major areas have less traffic, we are seeing an uptick on street homeless and these encampments, and this is something that we are discussing with our community partners and our local council people to find out how we can help to alleviate that issue, because housing is a concern. Housing is a concern. Affordable housing is more of a concern. I'm happy to report that we have 14 new members. We are very excited of the skill sets that they're bringing and the enthusiasm that they will add to our community board. At the lead of our district manager, Angel Muscane, he has designed 2 Zoom webinars. The first one we had a couple of days ago. It was a mini orientation on onboarding our members. And we are following a next one with a land use and budget process Zoom meeting for those members so that they can ask questions, get an idea of the intricacies involved in both topics. I am urging the Manhattan Borough President, who does such a great job with the virtual the leadership training, to potentially have those on Zoom meetings or make the materials available, as our members have expressed an interest in obtaining those materials or finding out when that would be scheduled to happen. Now, in the past, obviously, all these sessions have been in person. COVID-19 has made us rethink how we do things. And so if that is a possibility, I would love to urge the thought of putting that on a web or a dedicated page that people can click on and see the reports. Continuing concern at CB11 is regarding the drug treatment programs that are constantly moving in. We are now aware of at least 2 more programs who are moving in. There is a desire by these landlords to rent because there is dedicated monies for these programs, and so they don't always think about how they're affecting the community and what the community thinks about these programs. With that, I'll leave that. I want to also mention that I was part of a Digital Divide webinar. Thank you, Gail, for hosting that. It was quite enlightening, and considering that I have all the challenges logging in, it's quite interesting that I participated. I want to thank all my fellow chairs for the hard work that they do. It is always enlightening to hear the challenges that so mirror our own. Thank you.
Thank you, Nosa, and thank you, Xavier.
Real quick, Aldrin, could I add one little thing to that? Would that be okay, real quick?
Yes.
With the Open Streets campaign, I wanted to raise that Carrie King, with Uptown Grand Central, she had sent us an email raising an issue about they would be willing to participate, and they've had some difficulties because they wanted to simulate on weekends a party on the, like what we do in the summer with Party on the Park. And the DOT has said that the M98 runs down that pathway on Park Avenue South. And I haven't been able to witness that personally from 125th to 116th. And I would just ask that if someone could please elevate that issue to see, because that would allow us another resource with Open Streets. Because I've never seen the M98 run down that section, only 116th and then down Lexington. So just wanted to elevate that so we could actually have a conversation, see if there's another area we could actually open up for our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Xavier. And your community liaison, Isabel Abreu, is also listening in, as well as our Director of Community Affairs, Rosie Mendez. So in terms of Nilsa, in terms of the Community Board Leadership Training Series, absolutely. We intend to launch that series virtually very soon with the different types of trainings that we've offered in the past: parliamentary procedure, land use, advanced land use, landmarks, and the rest. So just stay tuned for that. And thank you for raising that Nilsa. Community Board 12, Elizar Bueno. Community Board 12 Chair, Elizar Bueno.
Hey, how are you? How's everyone? Am I next or?
Yes, yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you, each and every one of you for being here. Thank you, Aldrin and Gail, for the opportunity to continue to serve. Just gonna make it as concise and as clear as possible. The number one item is the new members that were appointed recently. They are, from the looks of it, continue very committed to come and serve the community at the best they can. There's no second chances for a first good impression. So we are trying to make sure that we have an orientation with the new members next month, so that they're ready to step in their roles. That orientation, we're gonna try and use the most experienced board members, the people that have led the way in CB12. One of them being Mr. Benjamin, who volunteered to be one of those people. The number 2 item in our that sticks out from what we've been trying to do for the past month is our new all of our boards of our committees, are meeting virtually, each and every one of them. And we've also added a component in which we have been training the more senior members, and we've also been requesting laptops and tablets for those board members who do not have the ability or the technology to meet some of the new requirements in order to participate in these meetings. And number 3, our community board has expanded its focus from just meetings and resolutions into meeting the immediate needs of our community. And what we've done, we've focused on 2 particular parts of the most parts of our community that are in most pressing need. One of them is the small businesses. We've since March started a seminar every Tuesday in which Gail has been part of. It's called What You Should Know, in which we've been discussing how the social distances within our establishment is going to look like. We've formed partnerships with law offices and law organizations like Manhattan Legal Services, in which there's a lot of training into how to insurance coverage handles income loss, and if and when there'll be some potential lease renegotiations with our commercial tenants. And last but not least, we've partnered with some local CBOs so that we can provide them with one of the most pressing needs that our community has, which is food. We've partnered with Hudson in La Marina and 809 so that we can provide 140 hot plates every Tuesday to an organization called Northern Manhattan Coalition for the Immigrants that Al has always been kind enough to help us with. So that's pretty much my report, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for that report. And Sister Lee Harris is right on time. Community Board 10 Chair, Sister Lee Harris.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm sorry, I'm actually trying to do, like, as we all are, 3 things at the same time or more.
Right on time.
So really quickly, we've been able to meet. I think all of our committees have been able to meet this past month, so I'm very proud of them. We've been doing a lot of good work. We do have our new board members. We are excited about them, great resumes. They've jumped right in on our first board meeting. We're still working out their committee assignments, and their orientation is going to be next week. But we're really excited about them, and they're ready to do the work. Some quick 3 things. Of course, we all have more than 3, but these are our top priorities. Nursing home issues. I know there's been a lot of coverage about them. We have our own issues on 138th Street, 128th Street, with the nursing home there. Sorry if you hear my.
Sorry, Cicely.
Can you hear me now?
Please don't know. Someone has to hit mute. Someone else is. We're hearing a background conversation.
That was probably me, but do you? I think.
It's okay. Sorry.
Sorry. My other call. Okay, so what's going on there? We used to have a community advisory board in that nursing home. When new leadership took it over, they disbanded us. We had a call with our housing chair, Dr. Dukes. Thank you, Athena and the Borough President, for taking on this issue. We now have established a new community advisory board. They're allowing us to reinstate that. So we will be able to have more communication with that nursing home, which includes when we're able to go in and check on things and look around and talk to those patients and different providers, what's going on. We will be able to do that. But thank you all for helping us with that issue. I think this resolution will get us to where we want to be with that. Also, testing sites. We've been getting more and more uptown. It's really important to engage our churches, and that's exactly what's going on. They're always a cornerstone in our community. The testing sites are there. The only thing that we were asking, there has been little notice about these testing sites. Yes, I don't think the advertisement has gone out. I know there's attempts at that, but the numbers that we're seeing do not justify what we know is going on in the community. So we have to do more to get that knowledge out about the testing sites that are in our churches. So right now they're at Convent and Mount Nebo, and I believe there's another testing site going to be next week at FCBC. So we are focusing on that, and we want to make sure that we are getting that out to our population. And then finally, our small business, we did have a fire on 125th Street on, I think it was on Wednesday, days are all mixed up, on Tuesday, I think. And I believe we had a presentation on the Public Safety Committee about that fire. FDNY has gotten right on that. We believe it was electrical conditions, but we're looking into that and how is that affecting our business corridor on 125th Street, and how is that affecting also the public health conditions that are there. So those are our immediate things. We do have an arts and culture meeting coming up in conjunction with the Borough President. These have been extremely helpful. They've been extremely inclusive of different art organizations. I believe that's on Friday. So we're excited about that and all the things that are going on there. That's all we have from CB10 right now. I can't hear you.
One second. So, okay, great. My daughter just brushed her teeth, so she wants me to smell her mouth that she brushed her teeth. So thank you for the update, Cicely. So now we're going to turn to a discussion, but we have Councilmember Mark Levine, who's been on from the beginning, and Councilmember Ben Kalos, but they can give their updates because I know they're going to contribute to the conversation of the reopening and reimagining of Manhattan that the Borough President will lead. So I'm going to turn over to the Borough President. As I turn over to the Borough President, it's important that you all realize and notice that we have Matthew Washington, the Deputy Borough President, on the line, also taking notes and participating in the discussion. Rosie Mendez, the Director of Community Affairs. Athena Moore, the Director of the Northern Manhattan Office. Jessica Mates, our Chief of Staff. And Lisette Chaparro, who's the Director of Land Use. And Lisette, did you want to briefly introduce your new staff or your whole staff now that you have a full complement of a land use team to support our community boards?
Yeah, I think I'm going to let them introduce themselves and share with everyone the boards they'll be covering. But just FYI, I'll still be on boards 4 and 5.
Okay. If they can quickly introduce themselves.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Chan, and I'll be on boards 1, 2, and 3.
This is Connor Allerton, and I'm covering Community Board 6 and 7.
Hi, this is Michael Nicholas, and I'm going to be covering Community Boards 8 and 11.
Good morning. This is Tim Anderson. I'm going to be covering Community Boards 9, 10, and 12.
Thank you. And also, I forgot to mention, we have the Director of our budget team, Vanessa, also listening in onto the reimagining and reopening of Manhattan, as well as, I believe, our Director of Policy, Shula Warren. So Gail, without further ado.
All right, I'm gonna go quickly because you have covered a lot, and I have to say congratulations to everybody. I want to echo Vicky's feeling that the folks who are on this governor and mayor task forces do not include the community boards, and that's why I wanted to have this discussion. You have covered a lot. I want to just say in terms of the streets and small business, I am a big fan of David Rockwell. The material, his article that he just wrote, he put a lot of time into it, involved a lot of people, is in the material that Rosie sent to you. I know he's working with Melba in Board 10, and I believe he's one of my favorite, if not the best, thinker about open space actually in the world, because he's all over the world. And if you would like him, for instance, to come zoom in on one of your committee meetings, probably we should have had him today. I was just worried about time. But you definitely should consider that, and we can certainly send you his information because he wants to be helpful. So He has some really interesting ideas. I don't know that any of this makes sense because of the cost, but you know, these restaurants around the world, there's the high-end folks have the money to put the plastic around the table. And that's what's the article in the Daily News yesterday. So of course, I'm always thinking, which manufacturer in New York City can build these plastic things? Even the nail salons around the world are putting plastic between us and the professional, and with a little place to put your hand so your nails can get done. This all seems like from another world, but it might be what we need in order to make us safe and in order to have the business be successful. So even down to that granular, talking to your businesses might be something you want to discuss. Now, how we use the public space and the issue of drinking and relaxing the outdoor cafe rules, etc. If possible, with your discussions, those are the kinds of granular that I would love to be able to send to these gazillion people on all these committees, because I think they're more grandiose in what they're considering. They are meeting constantly. I'm on one of the governors, and every single day, like twice, 3 times a week, we're meeting. I'm not sure we're making lots of headway. I try to bring up some of the issues that I've heard from you. So I'm not going to dwell on the small business and open space because you have it covered in terms of what you've been discussing. But I think as much specifics as possible will be helpful. Even, you know, if we want to have even the issues that are current, which I have noted, as well as ones in the future. But David Rockwell would, I think, come to your discussions if he is invited. The other thing, which is relevant, particularly uptown, I remember that the bid in Washington Heights, when we had a meeting with all the bids, talked about the lack of broadband. And that is not necessarily a small business restaurant, but it is a small business issue. He complained correctly that so much of his business communication has to be by phone or going to the business in the past. So we really need to work on this broadband. You don't hear a lot of discussion about it, but then when I'm on another health call with Congressman Espaillat, the doctors are complaining because, to their utmost credit, some of them are doing house calls. They get to the house and there's no connectivity. So telemedicine, if we're talking about a new world, telemedicine is serious. Obviously, we have all the challenges that the students have. We're going to have lots more working at home, which of course is another conversation. But I'd love to know, perhaps a discussion from the community boards, what kind of bandwidth, broadband, et cetera, exists in your neighborhood. I know it's a problem in Upper Manhattan, and we need to change that. I know that Silicon Harlem and others have been trying, but it needs to be on a fast track. The other issues that come up, we don't know. It's interesting to me that on transportation, the buses, thank goodness, are finally, because it's free. I know I get on the back. I'm so excited. I don't have to pay. I can find a seat. But it is interesting to me that the buses have expanded in terms of ridership more than the subways, maybe for the reason I just described. People feel safer. Pre-virus, I was always told, oh, buses, we're going to cut them because nobody's riding them. So I don't think we should cut them, but this would be another example of we need the buses, because I think, again, what is the transportation challenge that you would like to have addressed? Are people finding that the subway is or is not working? Stations, like I said, as much specific as possible makes sense. I know that Speaker Johnson has this 5-borough plan. You have been talking about what works for bicycle lane, what doesn't work. All of that would be helpful. I know that the bikes is interesting to me. I was the one actually that pushed the governor to make the bike shops essential, because at first they were not. And now, of course, not only are they open, but they are selling out the bicycles. Again, much information as possible, but we've been talking about this for a long time. I don't know what's going to happen with the schools. You know, you have CECs. I've been meeting with them on a pretty regular basis. My guess is it's going to be a lot of virtual. So what we've been doing, and I'd love to have your input, we've been talking to the executive superintendent of Manhattan. And again, that might be somebody or the superintendent to chime in on some of your Zoom discussions. There, who knows how many individuals never got the iPad or didn't participate. So Obviously, the executive superintendent cannot give to the borough president the name of everybody. That's not appropriate. However, what she is going to do is give me enough information about places where there are families. My guess, I don't know for sure, would be there's going to be a lot of families in NYCHA. Her biggest challenge, foster care children and children in temporary housing. So my guess is that's going to be a lot of NYCHA. So if she can give me the general location of some of these families, you and I know every single family almost in NYCHA, or we can find them. So we're going to see if we can help those families in any way by having peer-to-peer and neighbors whom they trust. In addition, through some of the groups that work as tutors and are already screened by the Department of Education pre-COVID, we're going to try to see if we can hook up some of these already screened tutors with families who are in this situation. It's a big challenge, but I'm determined that these schools are not going to be left without support. We need to have better schools in Manhattan. So that is something that if you, when in fact we are able to get the general location of these families, I'm going to rely on you and the CECs to try to get to them and get them the support they need. This TTT, I call it, the doctors are calling it the same thing, the testing, the tracing, and the treatment. So you do, like I said, let us know if there are testing sites that are not being listed. I do find, I agree with Cicely, it is the hardest thing in the world to find out where these sites are in a reasonable amount of time. And I think the churches are only there for a limited amount of time. I don't know how some of these lists get devised. The governor has a list and the mayor has a list. So I tried to put them together in our newsletter. I'm sure you're all getting our newsletter, and try to make sure the new members get it also, because we try to actually list them. So it was ironic because the state told me we have everybody on one list. That was one phone call. Then I got on a city call and I said, oh, it's great news that the city and the state are on one list. And then Tim Long, who's head of tracing for H&H, oh, sorry, Gail, not everybody on the city is on the state list. So like, come on, guys. But that's the problem that we're up against. Again, pushing out to the community that these testing sites exist. At the same time, the method to me makes no sense, because the message is if you have this or that, you can go to the testing. In reality, anybody can go, because I've been to these sites and they say, oh, just get in line, Gail. So you have to figure out whether, this is making sense or not. The testing, the tracing will start June 1st. We've been pushing, as you know, to have as much diversity in the people who are hired. The city is hiring 2,500 people. The state is hiring 17,000 upstate. They are coordinating in terms of hiring, more or less. They are both getting information from Johns Hopkins in terms of the data and the training. The city's using a group called Salesforce, and the state something called Virtual. So in terms of case management, in other words, Gail has the virus. So if I am going to be put into a hotel, or my friend whom I was with was going to be put into a hotel because we can't stay home, then this case manager group takes over with food and laundry and so on. So, you really do need to pay attention, finding out what is going on in your neighborhood and is it working, because, people are going to be very concerned about a million different issues regarding the tracing, as you can imagine. I think the NYPD and the ambassadors and the issue of social distancing, I think it's a little bit better. It was really bad. I hope that groups like Curb the Violence are utilized more. The ambassadors are people who are city employees. I think it's again around 2,500 who were hired, mostly parks. They're all unionized, some from other agencies, about 1,000 from parks and 1,000 from other agencies, as I understand from the unions. And of course, some of them may get laid off, which is another challenge. So you're going to see some discussion about that, because this may not be their full-time job forever, because some of them are on the layoff list, which makes no sense to me. The nightlife woman, the commissioner, has been calling quite a bit. And I just think you should, in addition to the hospitality industry phenomenal leaders, I think you should make sure that she's involved. I know that sometimes, it's good to have the voice of the nightlife community, because one way or another, they're going to be doing what they should or should not be doing. So I think that would be another challenge to have addressed with her input. I'm very concerned about retail. I was given a number, I don't know if it's correct, that nationally, 9,000 retail closed last year, and already 3,000 have closed this year. The restaurants are going to have enough of a challenge in terms of their space and the outdoor, but the curbside drop-off for retail, I don't know what that is. If you have a large department store, I don't know how they're going to do curbside. So I know that Kathy Wild and others are trying to have appointments if that's what it would take. If you're a small retail, that's fine. But the larger retails, I don't know how you're going to have curbside drop-off. So how should your retails, what do they need in order to survive? That would be another question that we need to have addressed. As Cicely said, the arts and the entertainment has been hurt more than any other industry. That's a general feeling. Manhattan is nothing but entertainment. We are the entertainment capital in the world. Between Broadway, the arts groups uptown, just the arts groups on the Lower East Side, the music, everything. You know better than I. There is a feeling that the entertainment industry, because they can't go behind the curtain and social distancing, you can't sit in the seats and be socially distancing, and you can't act on Broadway unless you're a sole entertainer with nobody in the audience. So you can see how concerned this industry is. There is a general feeling that they're not going to come back in terms of what we're talking about until March of 2021. So I do think that the arts organizations in your area need to figure out if there's anything possible in terms of support. I know that as we heard, there is a group that is definitely pushing uptown in terms of their support, but there's not a lot. Not a lot of them got the PPP. Some of them aren't able to. I don't know what to say about it, except we are pushing that as many as possible get some of the tracing money. That is, I believe the salary for the tracer is $57,000 a year. So it's something that is definitely helpful. And as somebody said, if you're an entertainer, you can definitely be a good tracer. There are similar traits. The grocery stores, I know we heard about the bars and their challenges. I've heard a lot of lines. I've been in the lines. Some of them have markings for social distancing and some don't. So the question is, how do you monitor that? That may not be an issue in your area, but it is in some. I do want to talk about the budget. We're working on a budget document, but every single issue that you brought up is certainly one that we have to address. The homeless, I don't really understand. Maybe you do. Every time we're on a phone call with Steve Banks, it's very hard to ask a question. It's very monitored. And I don't understand. If the homeless or individuals are leaving the transit hubs, are they really going to a hotel, or are they just going to a shelter where they're going to leave or not go in the first place? There's a lot of discussion about moving people from the shelters to the hotels to make sure the social distancing, but there's not a lot of discussion about if you go from the street to the hotel, how do we then get you into supportive housing? And I think that's the discussion that we need to have, and we will try to have that in a more granular discussion. I want to just say that on terms of food, that's going to be an ongoing issue. There is no way that these seniors are going to feel comfortable coming out of their homes. I don't even know when. And so we have to make sure that we continue that food issue. There was an article in the paper today that there are lots of neighborhoods in the city that don't even have the food pantries that we do. So again, if you have some sense, I want to thank Board 11, because as soon as they won, as you heard, the paper challenge, they gave their $10,000, which came from Pratt Industries, to the local common pantry, which is a wonderful place to get food. But food insecurity is huge. We've been working with Fresh Direct, as you know, and the NYCHA developments, and it's been very successful, but we just can't have enough. And I don't know, during the summer, there's a big push to have the SYEP young people participate in that. I will just want to mention, sort of going around in a minute, the SYEP. So I know that there are groups that, despite whatever the mayor is stating, the city council, to their credit, and I know the city council members can jump in, are pushing for a lot of suggestions for SYEP. And one of them, certainly the folks in Board 9 are working with the West Harlem Development Corp. But in addition, we were on the phone yesterday with the police department, and they have some ideas for young people working on mapping projects, food insecurity projects, working with the seniors at NYCHA when they get their laptops or their iPads to be able to show them how to use it. And that can be all done virtually. So there are lots of ideas for the young people. And we had a wonderful YouTube discussion with tons of ideas. So we do need to keep up that pressure. And maybe the Borough Board could also make some suggestions along those lines. It's a very, very hard time. I know that we are going to be going back to food. We have these wonderful discussions. Nilsa mentioned one that she did with us on digital divide. Next Tuesday, May 26th, we're doing one at the Mailman with Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health. That's May 26th at 6:30. And the topic will be with Catherine Garcia and others to talk about that issue. So what I'm, in terms of schools, we continue to push for a social worker in every school. We had a YouTube discussion on that, and with all due respect to DOE, the answer is there's so many words that don't say anything when you ask them about it. I really can't even listen. That's just me. Just if you're going to talk, can't you tell me how many social workers you have full time and how many you need, as opposed to something that I can't even talk. It's a DOE talk, and it's not the way that I can do it. I want to say, of course, we thank you for indicating that you have received the individuals for the community board. I want to thank the staff here because it was a huge amount of work to figure out virtually and without personal interviews the best listing, and certainly the council members help. So we have completed almost, I think we have a couple of new vacancies, but basically completed all the appointments, and everybody deserves a lot of credit for doing that. And certainly thanks to Noel and others, the work that you're doing virtually is so far ahead of the other boroughs. I could not be prouder, and I thank you. The only other issue is, in terms of talking about what we've been working on, is the Solid Waste Advisory Board. The SWAB has 38 members. Many were also appointed and reappointed. There was a process of both, and they are pushing really, really hard, as we are, to not cut the organics program. That is something that has been in existence for not a huge amount of time, but is making progress, and I want to make sure that it continues. Again, all these issues are challenging. We just a couple other things. We're very soon going to have, thanks to Liz Caputo, a member of Community Board 7, her friend is going to be donating 100,000 masks to the members of residents of NYCHA. I don't know the exact date, but if that is an issue in your community, I don't know that they're all going to go to Manhattan, because I don't know that I have that control, but a lot of them will. So let us know if there is a development that is making a particular plea for masks. It's not any other PPE, but it is masks. And I also want to thank Board 8 on Kohler. That is, of course, a very fabulous H&H long-term facility on Roosevelt Island. There were a lot of challenges in terms of bringing in patients who are COVID. Right now, though, the outcome, and much thanks to Board 8, is that there will be a virtual town hall meeting with the Roosevelt Island Community Board, patients, families, staff at H&H, elected officials, to talk about what the concerns are, whether they're real or not. And I love that as an outcome of something that had a lot of concerns, because then you actually get the listing of what they really are. So I think certainly bringing in the council members, but what I need from you, and I have a lot from the work that you did, is between the health issues, the business issues, the tech issues, and certainly all of those small business, how do we, as a community that is perhaps literally the center of the world, how do we make sure that we have something that is community-based in terms of our recommendations? One other issue I want to mention, which I feel very strongly with about, is the Garment Center and all the work that Board 5 has done on that front. Now, of course, the mayor, as you know, wanted to send the Garment Center to Sunset Park, and we had a fit. And so it stayed here with $25 million was going to go from the bid and the owners to Sunset Park. That money is staying here. It is being allocated in the piece by piece basis. Lizette and Board 5 could talk more about that, but they also had 13 contracts during the height of we need garments made quickly, and they were able to produce it. So did Brooklyn, so did the folks in Brooklyn, but the folks here did also. So we need to have an ongoing discussion. Every meeting with all of the folks on these different task forces, I state, when are we going to bring manufacturing back to the state of New York? Why in the world does it have to be overseas? And since you can't travel overseas, doesn't it make sense? And I always get told, yes, Gail, we're looking at it. Even the infrared thermometers, which apparently the city has a stockpile of, I learned yesterday, but they could be made here. We need to think of ways that we could be more innovative about using our current resources. So these are some of the issues that we've been looking at. Again, in order to talk about the future, I certainly recommend David Rockwell for the restaurants, and I recommend trying to think of ways in which health, and you certainly have the chair of the health committee on the Zoom here, but I want to think lots more about the future, because we are all talking about how tracing, testing, but we're not saying how do we improve healthcare in the city of New York so it's more accessible, so all of these underlying conditions are addressed. Eric Adams is the worst person to have lunch with. Horrible, because he eats so many greens that you want to know if there's anything else on your plate. On the other hand, he beat diabetes. So there are ways of doing this and having, but I find it's very hard to figure out how to have a healthcare system, particularly in the borough of Manhattan, where we have all of this healthcare opportunity, but very, very hard to get to the people who actually need it. How could it be more accessible? I find it ironic that the state of New York can go door to door to ask about testing, but they can't figure out in the past how to go door to door and say, do you have diabetes? Do you have this? Do you have that? And actually make it easy and fun for people to participate in their own healthcare. That we don't do. We have to figure out how we do that and not just talk about it in the future. So those are some of my issues. I do like this plexiglass. It's certainly at my bodega on the corner. Plexiglass now exists. It makes the people who are serving you feel better at the cash register, and it makes me feel better as a customer. So these are the kinds of, how do we make that easier for the store so they can find out how to do it and not have to worry. So thank you very much, all of the Manhattan Borough President staff and everybody who is part of this amazing 12-board infrastructure that has really made us all so proud. But we have a lot of work ahead of us. Thank you. Thank you, Aldrin.
Thank you. So we're going to turn to Mark Levine and then Ben Kalos next, but we are going to have a conversation. So let me just frame something so the community board chairs could start thinking about this, so we could dedicate the last 20 minutes, or so to this. So the reopening for community boards, right? Contactless infrared thermometers, right? Will you deny access to a member who has a fever? Not. What does that look like? When you have a meeting, is half your board virtual and your other board physical? And are they sitting 6 feet apart? And what does that do for the public members? Do you do it also virtual? Do you do it in person? So how would a community board reopening look like in terms of engagement and participation? That's the first scenario. The second, the opening up of restaurants, is fabulous. Like Chipotle, Wingstop, very excited about street seating and curbside seating and the parking, taking parking spaces and taking the roadside. But so is El Malecón, and so is a Taco Bell Cantina and Thai, Yummy Thai. So, and so are the restaurants on the side street, as well as the restaurants on the avenues. Some restaurants even want maybe unused parking lots of DOE schools. Can we go into the parkland? So they're very exciting questions. So and then some restaurants are destinations, which some of your neighbors may not like the music or the clientele, may not favor their taste buds as much. And then there's a lot of complaints around that. So once we get to the council member and to the council member Levine and council member Ben Kalos, if we can, the chairs discuss a little bit, how do you envision a reopening of for community board in terms of your mandates for community engagement, outreach, and participation? And then also in terms of the restaurants and their footprint on the sidewalk, on the parking space, and on the roadways in some instances. And are people thinking creatively, even other areas whereby, and then, you know, the different natures of restaurants. Not all restaurants is not one size fits all, and the clientele vary as well. So for the community board chairs for discussion. But before that, Mark Levine has been very patiently awaiting, as well as Ben Kalos. We'll begin with Mark Levine.
Well,
Councilmember?
well, thank you so much, Aldrin. This has been such a great discussion already, and an important one, because under any scenario, we are probably still a year to a year and a half away from having a vaccine deployed to 8 million New Yorkers. And there's been some good news in the media in the last day or two about some positive developments in some of the vaccine trials, but none of that really changes the expected timeline. Remember, note how I explained it. We need to get a vaccine deployed to 8 million New Yorkers. And we're a long way from having such a vaccine and manufacturing it and deploying it. And I mean, in a good year, we probably only get 60 or 65% of people to get their flu shot. So let's remember that challenge as well. Between now and then, we've got to find a way to return to some sort of public life. A few people I talked to are starting to call it the new abnormal. And it's also going to mean a new abnormal for community boards and restaurants and all of us. The way we can tiptoe back to public life without a near automatic certainty of a rebound is through contact tracing. So that, unlike today, we have reasonable confidence that people who are contagious are not out there walking around. Right now, we don't have that confidence, partly because people don't even know they're contagious, right? They could be asymptomatic. And so we have to take incredible precautions right now. But contact tracing changes that, because everybody who gets a positive test result isolates, and then we find the people who may have been exposed to them, whether at home, in the workplace, or even in a restaurant when they're back open. We are going to face a real challenge on this. It's starting soon, a real challenge on getting public buy-in. If the public doesn't trust this, if the public doesn't believe in it, they're not going to pick up the phone from a contact tracer when they get a positive test result, because they don't want to have to tell the contact tracer all the people that they've had close contact with. Or if they get a call from a contact tracer saying you have to quarantine for 14 days, they're not going to want to do it. There's so much mistrust of government. There's fear amongst, honestly, very understandably, fear amongst undocumented immigrants, with communities who have faced overly aggressive policing, who have understandable misgivings about all this. We have to work really, really hard to communicate to people that this is about saving the lives of your family members, of your neighbors, and of the very communities who have been hit hardest by this virus. And I think for all of you as leaders, that you need to make this no less of a priority than promoting the census has been for you. That you need to communicate in every forum you have that this is life or death for our city. And you need to talk about all the ways that privacy is being built into this, that patient confidentiality is built into this, all the ways we're going to accommodate people who need to quarantine, including, if they need it, food, medication, prescription medication, even things like dog walking and laundry if they need it. And so I don't want to go on too much longer because I've taken up too much time. Community boards need to lead on this. You need to have a voice in shaping this program, and you need to have a voice in building confidence in the public. And I would love to work with all of you on this. But I think you all are poised to make this this key pillar of the next stage succeed for New York City. So thank you, Madam Borough President. Thanks to all the leaders here, and thanks, Aldrin.
Thank you, Councilmember Levine. Councilmember Kalos?
I'm going to try to frame my report in terms of the discussion, a lot of our borough presidents' leadership and post-pandemic Manhattan, and just framing it around some of the pieces that are incredibly important here. I think we have to start, if we're talking about a post-pandemic Manhattan, with an acknowledgement that there are systems of institutional racism in the private and public sector. Government does not have its hands clean, that have cost the lives of more Black and brown people who've been our essential workers than anybody else. And those who are not essential have now been laid off, and we need to do something more for these communities. And broadband is a key to that. I was able, working with Gail and Tish James, to secure Spectrum Internet Assist and Internet Assist on LTs, that if there are families who are low income, they can get broadband at the home for $14.99. It's currently free for any family who doesn't have broadband. So if the community boards can be a partner in getting that out to folks, families can get 60 days free if they don't already have it. And along those lines, we have an opportunity through this broadband, through the fact that people are home and may be unemployed, to get them the training they need to get a job that can be remote, and so that we can get them out of the essential economy and into a safe economy where we're not putting their lives on the line. I'd also like to just mention, and I try to appoint as many community parents to the community board as I can, because I see that as an underrepresented constituency in the city. And I'll just say we do need to figure out how to rebuild our economy so that we're not spending all of our time trying to tell parents that they have to work in the workforce and the government's just going to take care of your kid, which is what the model's been, but actually trying to build around parents and families and children. And you can hear my daughter in the background having a situation of being on an hour-and-a-half conference call while your child needs daycare and both parents are working is not ideal, and we need a better solution. When we talk about reimagining our streets, our borough president has led on the social distancing in our streets. Sorry about that. My daughter has figured out how to use all of my electronics. But we should be using our sidewalks for safe social distancing. We should be converting our parking and streets into places for dining and liquor service. And on the east side, we have a problem with this because people are gathering and large numbers, and the borough president had already written a letter. We wrote one very specific to the Upper East Side. Community Board 8 has passed a resolution. We need all the community boards to be passing resolutions on this. And we need to be converting more streets to social distancing. I was able to get East End opened up right away. We need to work with every community board to identify more streets. I'd like to continue going down East End, CB6. I'd love to do Sutton Place South, but I want to use this space to get things done, not just talk about the things. In terms of education, spending $250 million on $750 iPads you can buy for $400 is the biggest waste of money I've ever seen in my life. They ran out of people to give it to. There's still 20,000 they haven't given out. We could get $14 million back that would pay for a lot of SYEP. I want to thank all the community boards that have been passing resolutions. It will be bad if on July 1st, we have 100,000 children not in school with nothing to do. We need SYEP so badly. And Gail Brewer and I have been investing in technology for all of our schools. Gail, a little bit more than I have, but every school in my district's gotten money from me for laptops every year since I've been a council member. And that meant that in my district, all these kids were able to be handed laptops who didn't have them, like at Life Sciences, which is a school that is 99% students of color from outside Manhattan. And so we shouldn't be in a place where we're spending $700 on an iPad and what have you. And we should be working with internet providers to get broadband for every single student. In terms of issues of food distribution, sorry, my daughter wants to join the call. And so on the issue of food distribution, we've heard a lot of complaints about the quality of food. And so as Gail mentioned, Eric Adams is quite the health person. And so we are introducing legislation with Eric Adams to set food standards on the food that we are distributing. Also, we've been, believe it or not, she behaved for the full hour and a half till now. And this isn't even misbehaving. This is just a kid being a kid who wants to be engaged after an hour and a half. Again, we need to plan around parenting. But on terms of masks, the mayor announced he was doing mask distribution. Gail Brewer and so many of us elected officials in Manhattan said, wait, you missed the entire East Side. So the mayor then said, fine, you do it. So he's distributed masks to a lot of the elected officials in Manhattan. We've already given out thousands and thousands from East Harlem to Roosevelt Island. If your community board needs masks, I'm looking at you, CB11, CB8, CB6, and are able to distribute, we are happy to share our masks with you and make sure you've gotten it. If you don't have masks and you need it, reach out to your elected officials and get them because they have them, even if they haven't told you they do. Another big question we've been getting is, where do we buy these masks? Because if you go to CVS or Duane Reade, which are everywhere in my district, folks don't have it. So one of the things we've been working with the Borough President on is trying to get these mask vending machines. So I think that's a little bit about the future. And I'm hoping we can continue to work together on that. And just like two things that are unrelated but are vital for our future, we have an election. Democracy has to continue. And so we have a primary for president, Congress, your state electeds, and many more. It's on June 23rd. We need vote by mail. Every community board should pass a resolution in support of vote by mail. But for the time being, Governor Cuomo has issued an order. You may check off temporary illness, and you can go to nycabsentee.com or the regular methods to do so. I think that is the end of my report, according to my daughter.
Thank you, Councilmember Kalos. So to Gail, Barry, I see you. I'm going to call on you next, Barry, in terms of starting the conversation, the two scenarios that I set out. But Gail, Mark, and Ben, we have one question. There's people that have been waiting for like 2 months to see their families in nursing homes. They have not been able to visit their families in nursing homes. What can be done about this? People want to see their families. Anyone?
I could say a word if you'd like.
Someone just asked this question in our question and answer, so that's
sure.
why I'm asking.
I could say a word on that, Aldrin. This has been the entire medical system. Hospitals too have had to, during the peak of the crisis, because of fear that visitors could either spread the virus or get the virus, or take up precious PPE. Now that we're past the crisis stage in the hospitals, the governor has announced a plan. It's a pilot at this point, but I think it's about 20 hospitals now are allowing visitors under strict conditions. It's one per patient. It has to be full PPE, of course, at all times. Visits are limited, I think, to a couple of hours. They're piloting this in the hospitals right now. And I believe they're considering it for nursing homes. Unfortunately, nursing homes are not quite as far along. And the number of cases there is still higher than it should be. And the staff is still under enormous strain. So I think the feeling at the state level, and the state, of course, regulates nursing homes, is that it's just not quite possible yet. But I believe, not that I have any inside information on it, that given if the hospital pilot is successful, that it will then be taken to the nursing homes. And to the extent I can keep you, Aldrin, and the Borough President's office updated on that, and our community board leaders, I certainly will.
All right, thank you. Any other comments?
If I can just jump in on a little bit more information, some more inside information. We need to work with our hospitals, and even Kohler and Gail and I were talking about it yesterday with Kohler about making sure that we get Wi-Fi into these locations and make sure that folks at least have the virtual visitation. I haven't gotten to see my in-laws in person in weeks. Most people consider that a good thing for me. I love them. They're vital to our childcare. And that is one piece. The other piece is it's testing, testing, testing. And I know a lot of folks haven't been in favor of the testing, but I've been pushing for it since the beginning, and we've been building partnerships with the healthcare institutions. I know Gail Brewer's been working with NYU. I've been working with Cornell. And if we can get to the rapid testing, and I think we can get to a place where somebody could go to a nursing home, get swabbed, not even the painful swab, but a saliva swab, and sit in the waiting room for half an hour, get cleared, and then know that they weren't asymptomatic and go see their family. Of course, we could have PPEs just in case there was an error rate, but some of the tests we're looking at would test any presence whatsoever. So I think if we can get to a place where we have the ubiquitous testing that we need and the ubiquitous antibody testing, we can get to a place where folks can do so very, very safely. And I want to thank the Borough President for her leadership with NYU. We're working with Cornell. You can read about it in Our Town. And like, we are on this precipice, and it is going to be up to the FDA to let it happen.
Yeah, I think only Rutgers has the saliva test at this point, but I have to say every developer is telling me that every time somebody goes into their commercial building, that's what I've been talking about, they're gonna have to have a saliva test. Just FYI, that's the only way they're gonna feel safe. That's not nursing home, but that is an example of what you're talking about. Thank you, that's it, Alvin, from me.
So as you all know, New York State now allows religious gatherings of up to 10 people, right? So that may or may not mean, you know, things to a lot of people, or that may or may not make sense. But so now community board openings. We mentioned saliva tests for some commercials, so we have contactless thermometers, limiting the amount of people to 10. So how does the community board reopening for your meetings, your full boards, committees in person look like? Barry has his hand up. I'm not sure if it was on that first scenario, but Barry, if you can speak.
Yeah, so this is a conversation we've actually been having at CB9, and one of our biggest worries is that the state of, you know, we are required to meet in person by law under normal circumstances, and it is only through suspension of the relevant portions of the open meetings law that we are able legally to do our meetings virtually. One of our big concerns is that those provisions will be unsuspended too early in the recovery process, and we won't be able to hold meetings remotely or allow members to vote remotely. And so that's a major concern. And one thing to think about is even if the state lifts certain restrictions around people meeting in person, you may still need to be 6 feet away indoors. You may still need to operate at less than maximum capacity. You may need to have masks. And at what point is it not worth meeting in person just because all of these other restrictions make it more difficult to meet in person than virtually? And so I think it's our strong preference that even if some form of in-person meetings are permitted, we still be allowed to hold meetings where members can call in virtually and vote virtually, even though that's not in accordance with the normal provisions of the open meeting laws, because, you know, there is still a significant amount of risk until everybody is vaccinated, as Councilmember Levine was saying, and we don't want to unnecessarily risk our members' lives, many of whom are members of vulnerable populations. That being said, you know, I think it's really key for us as community board members to acknowledge that a bunch of people who come to our meetings haven't been able to call in or access us because they lack, you know, access to digital connections, and that's a huge problem. I don't know if we could hold our meetings in our normal spaces virtually, or, you know, part virtual, part in person, because they're not equipped with either the audiovisual equipment or the internet connections or both. And so there are some real logistical challenges to even a partial reopening for the boards in terms of meetings, and they mirror challenges that other, you know, populations have faced with remote connections during this time. So those are some of the major concerns that, you know, our office manager and myself and other members of our executive committee have been kicking around as we think about what's coming in the future And also, I just don't know that testing is where we need it to be in terms of volume for, you know, a broad reopening. Like, our country's original sin with this pandemic, aside from all of our many myriad pre-existing original sins in terms of inadequate healthcare access and racial disparities, our original sin that started in 2020 was not testing, not having enough capacity to test, and not having an effective testing, isolation, and tracing regime in place that allowed things to get as bad as they did. So it's not clear to me that we as a country, or we as a city and state, even as we've expanded testing, have reached the point where we're testing enough volume of people that we can figure out who's infected and who's not, and do contact tracing for those who are. So I think those would be the major concerns that our board has about a reopening for community boards. And I'll stop there.
In terms of, a letter from the Borough President's office, or different signed by chairs or resolutions that, you know, sometimes the governor doesn't really consult with community board chairs when he does his executive orders or he lifts them, but you're looking at, there needs to be provisions for a hybrid model, right? Where there's in-person, and then there's also the option for virtual, because not everyone will be, either the science doesn't back that everyone should be in the room together at 6 feet apart, or even if the science bears it out, people may not trust it. And some of your community board members, while you say the air is clean after 9/11 and come back, some people didn't believe that and didn't come back to ground zero until after several months or years. So you're saying
they were right, by the way.
And they were right. So we can say, come back, community board members, and we can all meet together. But some community board members might say no, and that shouldn't be an absence. They should be able to vote and participate virtually. And that would require, when the governor lifts any particular executive order, it will have to be more nuanced, right? And we would have to bring that to his attention.
Right, and we know that a community board meeting would be the exact type of place where this disease would be transmitted, because we know that only 0.3% of transmissals that have been traced have occurred outdoors, right? The vast, vast, vast majority of infections have occurred in offices and restaurants and other places where there is closed air being recirculated, where people are spending an extended period of time in a room with one another, and where there is talking, and especially if you're at a meeting in public, there's going to be loud talking with droplets being spewed more forcefully than just regular breathing. And so, you know, I would not feel comfortable asking almost any of my, if we had to reopen and have an in-person component to the meeting, it would be me sitting at the front and maybe one member of the office staff 10 feet away with a camera. And, you know, if we can, the rest of the board called in, because I don't want to put my members or the members of the public at risk by, and we know that being in an enclosed space like that is risky.
Other recommendations, opinions? Oh, Mark Diller, I see your hand up. And oh wait, sorry, Mark, pardon me. In the order of hands going up, and Anthony Notaro.
Thank you, Aldrin.
And then Mark Diller, then Mark.
Thank you. I just want to briefly echo what you and Barry have been saying. For the last 2 months, CB1 has done all of our meetings virtually. Now, it was a rocky road, but we've gotten a lot better at it. In fact, this past Tuesday night, we had a committee meeting, and it was open, obviously, to members and to the public. And we had at one point, 77 people on the line. And that's probably as large as we get in many of our meetings. And so I like the idea of the hybrid. We haven't fleshed out a whole process yet at CB1, but we're thinking that many of our meetings in the future would be, if not continuing with virtual, at least some hybrid. And so I would encourage the Borough President or my other peers to ask the governor to allow such hybrid meetings. Because I think putting the onus on a community board to potentially test or screen everybody at every meeting is going to become unworkable or not get the results we want. That's what I have to say. Thank you.
Mark Diller.
Thanks. So I'll try to add without repeating, because a lot of what I believe is the correct case was said by Barry and by Anthony and by Aldrin. I'll start with saying that by way of adding that in addition to the safety that has been provided by remote meetings, we are hearing from members of our community who, for a variety of reasons, would not come to an in-person meeting before. There are senior citizens for whom taking their walker to the M104 bus and riding for 25 minutes after waiting for 25 minutes to get to an in-person meeting to speak for 1 or 2 minutes is just not an efficient use of their time and their energy, but who are happy and to contribute to our discussions. So I would want to see that continue no matter what happens with the reopening. Second thing is a brief note about, we talked a little earlier in this meeting about how the mayor's committees have scrupulously avoided involving community board members in decision-making and planning. Well, the governor's committees also are a little bit upstate oriented and a little bit out of the New York City realm. You'll notice, for example, his committee on education doesn't have the chancellor of either the state or the city schools on them. So I think a forceful but respectful joint letter from all 12 boards and the borough president, if we can get there, would be a minimum of how to try to get the governor to extend the executive order. The reality, and I think Barry started to talk about this, but to put a finer point on it, the reality of the logistics of the spaces in which we're able to meet, we're up to 50 members of my board, our board, excuse me, and any number of the members of the public can safely congregate. We've had meetings this past year where it was a little on the unsafe side and we weren't even making any efforts to socially distance. Put a bike lane or a parking issue on our agenda and you'll see folks turning out. So it's really important that there be that second option, and quite frankly, those spaces would not accommodate even social distancing among my 50 board members. So the logistics of space and all that is correct. The last thing I want to touch on briefly as another impetus for this, just to pile on and to echo a little bit of what I understood Councilmember Mark Levine to be speaking about, and forgive me if I got it a little bit wrong, is we were talking about the whole aspect of testing and tracing, but unless and until, I think we need to keep in mind that there are anti-vaxxers out there who have been plaguing, among others, State Senator Brad Hoylman with respect to the ordinary vaccines that are required of our school children. My point is that there's a certain element of self-restraint and self-responsibility that is inherent in this testing and tracing and treatment protocol that requires a certain faith that everybody who's informed of being a carrier will do the right thing. And I think that until we can have a vaccine that will actually protect folks, we're going to have reluctance on the part of both board members and the community to join into these conversations if they have to be in person. So while I would absolutely welcome seeing any and all of you in person anytime soon, I think the reality is that we need to prepare for a much longer period of remote and virtual gatherings. Thanks. I'm sorry to go on so long, but there's a couple of nuances that I wanted to raise there. Thank you.
We have other chairs with their hands raised. Aleda Kemp? No, you're on mute.
I am. Now I am. Thank you. Thank you. I would like to echo what everyone has said in some form of hybrid, and our board, as I mentioned earlier, will be exploring this. Part of the issue for us is that in-board meetings, and this was expressed quite passionately, are very different from virtual meetings. And there's much more of a sense of community of collaboration when you're all together. As we all know, virtual meetings gives no opportunity for people to actually talk to each other before they get to the meeting, after they get to the meeting, and there is an impact on the nature of the meeting because of that. On the other hand, having the public be able to call in and have board members who can't get to the meeting because they're sick, but they're able to listen to it and participate that way, or because they have a broken leg, that happen to a board member, it's important to be able to accommodate both when it comes to that. The other question I would raise is, do we want community boards actually policing whether people are taking their temperatures or wearing their masks? There have been altercations, not only around the country, but in New York City, and should community boards, and it was suggested that community board members, volunteers already, police open streets to make sure that people are not congregating without masks. I don't think that's the community board's job to do that. But that's besides the point. Do we want to be in a situation where we're actually barring people who are not wearing a mask or who won't let us take their temperature from community board meetings? Is that something that we alone should be doing? So I would weigh in on both the hybrid, working with the governor, working with the mayor to figure this out, to be included in all of these, and we're happy to do that, and then having some kind of aspect where everyone could participate. And I don't know what that looks like because I don't know what the technology supports, but certainly to be able to do that and accommodate everyone and have it be as inclusive and representative of and responsive to the community as possible. Thank you so much.
Aldrin, I just want to jump in about the technology because I am concerned about that, and that's not something to discuss today, but maybe we could get through Do It or a private, public-private partnership, because, you know, I've been at Google and you're in a room with more technology, so you feel like the person in, you know, Idaho is with you. That is not how you feel at a Community Board 8 meeting at the Blood Center. So we got to figure out, and I think if community boards, if we're going to do the hybrid, which I've always liked, you've got to have a whole different, you can't just have a screen that you pull down, etc. So I'd love community boards to say, in our office we have X, and when we go to the place where we meet, we have Y, or whatever it is, because that's a cost. And if we're going to do it, it has to be much more sophisticated, I think, than what we have now. Thank you.
Thank you. Asia, you're unmuted. Proceed.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I agree with everything that was said beforehand. Just 1 point or 2 points I wanted to bring up. I am concerned about having virtual meetings too long because I do think it inhibits you know, leadership development on the board, because usually the way we do so is sort of the soft mentoring skills that come with live meetings and encouraging people to participate, and that does inhibit like questions and those pieces. But I do think what we've all discussed before would be great. And the other piece I would make is if we are going to write a letter to the governor, as Manhattan community boards, I think it would be great if we could talk to some of the other borough presidents and get sort of all the community boards to sign on to a letter about how this would go for. As an anecdote, I talked to somebody on one of the community boards in Queens. They actually are not really holding meetings other than to just chat and see how everybody's feeling. So they haven't even really moved on to real business. And I'm worried that if they're not moving on to real business, that might be a concern to getting some of the things that need to be done if they're not able to do virtual meetings in a way that works to the mission.
Thank you. Michael Marino, you're unmuted. Please proceed.
Thanks, Aldrin. I mean, I agree with what everyone said so far, but I wanted to bring up the technology issue and the resources issue that Gail was talking about. I mean, we've been, right now, the way that we've been meeting is we've only been meeting if an agency needs a resolution, but in June, we are having every single one of our committees meet. And, you know, it's been a lot of time for myself and one other board member who are the ones who are most trained in Zoom, because we're making sure to be on each one of these calls to help facilitate the background stuff, kind of like how Noelle is on our call today. So as much as I support a mixed model, because I think it does increase people's ability to attend, which was evidenced by our land use meeting last week, that 130 people logged on to that. And some people even said, I'm calling in from Jersey, but I used to live in Chinatown. The resources need to be there for us to be able to do it successfully.
Thank you. Carter Booth, you're unmuted. Please proceed.
So one of the things, we've had a lot more board members participating in a lot of our committee meetings, the committees that they're not members of. So that's been really a great for us to have that happening. Another thing, I think that most of our boards are way ahead of where the suspension of the open meeting law stands today, in that we all have public participation and public testimony. That's actually not a requirement in the governor's order right now. It's only that it be live streamed. And I think that that's something that we should highlight, that we've actually gone further for, I'm pretty sure it's all the boards, than what the governor's order requires, and maybe ask him to shift it to include public participation in the live streaming, or in video conferencing, because that's really the evolution to the hybrid model. We're actually ahead of what they require. And so, for example, at the Liquor Authority, you can't testify in person during a public meeting. You can only submit correspondence, 5 days beforehand. So I think that that's something that's important for us to note, that we're actually ahead of the curve on that, and we really value public participation. And I think that that's a way that we might be able to lobby effectively to move in the direction of a hybrid model at some point. I don't think that we're ready just yet. And just to address the mentoring aspect, it's interesting. One of our members pointed out that we have 5 generations on our board. And so mentoring for some doesn't seem like it's happening, but for others, it's actually happening in more, because the interaction face to face, even though it's on video, is happening with people in more of offline chats or smaller chats between board members. And so there's different ways. And I think that 5 generation aspect is something that we need to think about, and particularly with the term limits coming up. And that's really a way to think about how you can get more interaction. And that's what meeting virtually does. It allows for more meetings to occur and more people to participate. I think everybody else covered everything. Thanks.
Thank you. Aleida, and then I want to get the chairs in terms of the second scenario on the restaurants. But Aleida, you're unmuted. Please proceed.
I'm sorry, this has nothing to do with that. I just wanted to throw something else in the pot in terms of talking about New York, which is what the landscape will look like, and construction and permits and all of that. So I'll leave it with that. It's not for anything now, but just to ask if you would put that on your list. Thank you.
It's on the list, man. It's on the list.
Now for the second scenario, I'll see hands going, but just to repeat, I mean, we have a situation where it's pretty dire for the entertainment and restaurant industry, even prior to COVID, in terms of the public equity traded ones of restaurants, you had 6% average medium default rates. Now with COVID, default rates are up to like 30%. And for mom and pops, expected default rates are up to about 45 to 50%. So we obviously, everyone's interest to do something around this ecosystem of entertainment and the food industry and restaurants. So you have restaurants on side streets, on avenues, you have different types. How do you feel that will play out with the open space and the constituents around these establishments, and then also the very need for the jobs and the tax base and the economy? But here we're leveraging open space and public space. So we'll start off with Michael Marino, CB3. You're unmuted, please proceed.
And
Thanks. So I just wanted, I mean, in our district, there's going to be an inequity issue around using sidewalks and open streets, because you're looking at areas in Chinatown where, the sidewalks are 3 feet wide. There's not space for them to do outdoor seating outside of their restaurants and still maintain a pathway for people to walk by to get to where they're going. I think the other issue that I want to bring up as well is, as much as we are in support of restaurants using open space and parking spaces and things like that, I think I want to make sure that it's also done in a way that we're not loosening up any policies or procedures that give them the ability to, there's been a lot of talk in our district about loosening up the SLA rules and do administrative proposals for full liquor licenses. I don't want to give that up, because I don't want the community to be not included in discussions around liquor licenses and around permits and things like that. So, as much as we are eager to get restaurants and businesses back up and operating, I want to make sure that it's done in a way that the community still has some input into it.
So you're saying there's, in relation to Chinatown, at least as an example, there's an equity issue.
Yeah, I think there would be an equity issue for restaurants who don't have the ability to have seating outside because there's just no physical space for them outside because of their narrow streets and their narrow sidewalks.
Thank you. Next we have Barry. Please proceed.
Thank you, Aldrin. I keep getting, there we go. All right. I think that, you know, from CB9's perspective, although we haven't voted on this as a full board, so it's, you know, bear that in mind, that this is not an official position of the board. But I think that we are really intent on making sure that as many of our small local businesses as possible come back after this pandemic. And in general, we are not a board that has an issue with liquor licenses, with the exception of a very small handful of problems that we've had with particular locations. And so I think for us, we are going to be bending over backwards in many cases to try to help those restaurants get on their feet, many of whom employ, you know, people in the community, but doing so in a way that makes sense and that doesn't unfairly inconvenience other people who are involved. So, you know, we may not permit them to play music that can be heard outdoors, which may detract from their ambiance, but that's going to have to be a give on their end in exchange for, you know, taking up more sidewalk or even street space. When we're dealing with streets, we're going to be thinking not, you know, it's great to have people out in the streets for social distancing. It's great to have people eating outside for social distancing, but you know, we also have grocery stores and stores that need deliveries and that need other things, and those logistics have to be handled before this happens rather than in the aftermath of this. And so making sure that this is done in a well thought out way where deliveries are handled, where you're not creating an unsafe mix of bicycles, pedestrians, diners, and, you know, potential traffic is something that will concern us. But that being said, the potential for loosening open container laws and, you know, making it easier maybe for some of that to happen, making it easier for folks to maybe have these makeshift plazas like they have in other cities, particularly in Europe, where you can order from a restaurant on the plaza and they'll deliver to where you're sitting on the plaza. These are creative solutions that I think we'd be down to discuss and really look at. But you know, for us, it's going to be about balance and making sure that as we try to be good neighbors and support our local restaurants and businesses, our local restaurants and businesses are good neighbors to the community in the types of, you know, burdens they place on the neighborhood. But, you know, we are generally a very pro small business, pro restaurant, pro bar board. They add a lot of value to our neighborhood and we'd like to see more of them in our neighborhood. But we just have to make sure it's being done in a sane, well thought out, well planned way.
Thank you. Anthony Notaro?
Yes, thank you, Aldrin. I don't want to repeat what everyone else has said. Our board has not taken this up yet because it's relatively new. So I'm going to give you kind of my impression and also an observation. My impression is that all of us, myself, most of my board members, if they ask them if we support small business, and getting them some help to come back, everyone will agree that's a good idea. However, I will tell you that an observation is that many of my members will push back on the basis of what they say we're giving a public space to private enterprise. Now, we could debate that all day long. And then, as Barry said, and even you said, you know, there's a lot of detail about carrying liquor out, how much it might burden a particular neighborhood, noise, etc. And I think we can work on those issues. But I know that we'll have a strong debate about giving over space to private use. So that's all we have. But I think conceptually it makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Cicely Harris, you're unmuted. Please proceed.
Again, not to, I do want to validate the points that were made ahead of time. Those are things that are concerning us. We also haven't dealt with this yet as it is relatively new. But for us, Sanitation has always been an issue, so I would also have questions about how that would work if we're opening up these spaces that are usually not areas where there is cart service and things like that. What will we be doing to make sure that there is trash pickup, that people are still, social distancing, and all of those things play a part into why we would have a little bit of an issue with now these open spaces being used for that use.
Thank you. Prior to calling on Carter Booth and Mark Diller, I'd like to recognize Ben Kalos.
Thank you. I think my hand had been raised prior. I just want to say that I think for the equity issues, particularly in Chinatown and other places, I don't think that any sidewalks in Manhattan are particularly big enough for sidewalk cafes, even sometimes before the pandemic, because they didn't count the tree beds. So if you were on the east side where we have a lot of sidewalk cafes, the sidewalk went from 12 feet or 16 feet wide down to 4 feet wide, especially near a tree. So I really think that the parking spots would be essential. And when you take away the parking on both sides of the street, and I don't represent Chinatown, I'd be curious to hear from the, I believe it's CB1, just in terms of if you took Mott Street and you took the parking off Mott Street, could that create safe space for folks to use that street for sidewalk social distance eating? And then in terms of the entertainment piece, which I don't know anyone has addressed, and I swear I've been working with this organization before I knew Gail Brewer was involved. It's because of Justin Krebs. There's a group called The Tank. They offer free space for artists to perform. And this is also an organization that Gail happens to be intimately involved in. And what they've been able to do is transition to moving their performances, which are a fee-based performance, to online and charging people to watch it. I know 92nd Street Y in my district is experimenting between two different business models of making content available for free versus doing some events that they're still doing online. So I think to the extent that government or the borough president can work with folks to get a place where we're going to do a little bit of what like Major League Baseball or basketball might be doing in terms of doing live performances and having a remote audience that is paying because they want to see it live, and there's value to that. And I think the other piece is just what the Tank is doing is everyone's remote and people are tuning into their shows. So I think just to reach into that, I think that might help.
Thank you. Carter Booth, please proceed.
Yeah, so this is something we've been talking about for some time in our community because of the density of restaurants, and really hoping that some of them can survive. The equity issue that was raised is a huge issue for us. We're a little unique in that we don't have a traditional grid system through a lot of our board. And so we have a little bit more room for creativity, but, closing a parking spot or two in front of a place, that's not enough. It's just simply not enough with 6 feet spacing for any businesses to survive, particularly with the businesses next to them. I think that, we're going to be having some discussions about Friday nights, Saturdays, Sundays, really, which are the key nights for businesses to have their seating and that they can gear up for. We don't have a position on this yet, but we imagine, that there are a few different types of space. There's spaces that are in immediate proximity to a restaurant, which would be, the parking spaces in front. You've got something in close proximity, which is maybe within a block, a little longer proximity, which would be a couple blocks, in common areas. And we really envision having a discussion and perhaps advocating for closing streets during specific times so that a restaurant that has 50% capacity could have 10 tables, 10 two-tops, for example. That might be an incentive for a restaurant to consider opening so they can really bridge the gap until the people come back to our community. I mean, we envision the seating as the people who live here, not for visitors. We don't anticipate any visitors coming soon. So it has to be really nice seating to encourage people out of their homes to actually patronize the businesses. And that's something that we have such a different mix of restaurants that it's really something that is going to be a huge challenge. But the equity is something that has been raised to me from the beginning. You know, we're not in the position of choosing who survives and who doesn't. And that's why we really have to make room for these distances that are not right next to a business. So for example, open streets is a little bit of a different model in that sharing an open street with a restaurant may not work for a lot of mid-level restaurants and higher end restaurants, but we can envision having 3 or 4 different restaurants, having a seating section as an extension of their restaurant, perhaps, as a model that might work. I've had a lot of discussions with the Nightlife Association really just to talk about this, because a lot of it is the logistics of extending how the regulations work from Department of Health, who's responsible for cleaning tables. Can they have wait stations in those other areas to sort of, if they're a distance away? You know, some of the allowances for the liquor licenses, you know, as far as, is there a wait staff serving? Is somebody of age? There's a lot of different issues, but if we talk about it right now, we can really flesh this out to see what really can work. But the permitting of Friday nights, Saturdays, and Sundays, for us, we envision that as really being key to encouraging restaurants that may open under 50% or less capacity to see if they can bridge that time, you know, until the weather's a little cooler and people are coming back.
Thank you. Mark Diller, you're unmuted.
And Alizé, make sure you see Alizé and CB12.
Yes.
Oh yeah, CB12. Okay. Okay.
Am I
I
unmuted?
see his hand up. Let me take Mark. Let me take Mark Diller, and then Elizar Bueno. I'll come to you after Mark Diller. Sorry, I didn't see your hand up.
Very good, thank you. So again, in an effort to add without repeating, the equity issue is incredibly important, and that's why community boards need to be at the forefront of planning this on a local level, because what works in CB1 is not going to work in CB7 and vice versa. Our sidewalks are a different dimension, and we may have plazas. Other folks may have streets that can be functionally closed. We may not. We do hope that and we'll have this meeting coming up next week to continue this conversation. We do hope for a different reaction from the public about closing off public spaces for their favorite small businesses to survive than we do for some other potential uses of public space. I guess I'll just wait and see how that works out. And again, the idea of community boards being at the front, there are lots of backyard spaces to restaurants in our district, but there's a very different community reaction to having commercial space invade the donut, if you will, the quiet backyards, as opposed to extending into the streets and front yards. So with respect to the issues of noise and sanitation that needs to go with those public spaces, again, having a direct link to the uniformed services to make sure that those places are safe and that they are properly cleaned up after, which isn't always the case with public dining, are things that community boards will know how to do best. So I think that's why we should be continuing to push this from this forum. Thank you.
Thank you, and that's a good segue. While CB5 might be one of the noisiest in the city per capita, CB12 has the distinction among all media outlets to be the noisiest CB in all of New York City. So with that distinction, CB12, and if you say you want to close all of Dyckman for restaurants, I think you will crash the 311 system. Not that means you shouldn't do it, but just curious to see what CB12 thinks about that. Proceed. CB12, go ahead.
Am I on?
Yes, you're on.
I think you just pretty much described a lot of what I was going to say. And I'd also like to point out, as a business owner, 50% capability does not mean that you're going to meet 100% of your financial obligations. A lot of those are walking in with 3 months worth of rent debt, 3 months of Con Edison debt, So by the time we open up our gates, we $100,000 in the hole for the mid-size, 300, 400, 500 people lounges or restaurants or whatever the case may be. So we know we don't have the magic. We're not just gonna solve the problems just because. But I think that a forum in each individual community board in which there's some forms of inclusivity with business owners before we make any decisions, it'll go a long way. As it was said earlier, all community boards are different, but so are businesses. So I think that we should bring them into the table, get their feelings, get where they are, see if we can expedite a lot of the bureaucracy behind getting a sidewalk cafe permit. How we can make that happen sooner than in normal times. So we have to get the business owners into the table so that the decisions are, as Barry said, well thought out. But they're well thought out when you have all parts thinking as one. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Barry?
Yeah, very briefly, I just wanted to add one last thing, which is when we're talking about our small businesses and being open, some of them have been experimenting with ways to stay open even during this crisis. And I want to kind of shout out some efforts that one of our assembly members, Danny O'Donnell, has undertaken with his office to coordinate orders and deliveries amongst our local restaurants to St. Luke's or Morningside, Mount Sinai, Morningside, whatever they're calling it these days, St. Luke's Hospital to me. In that, similar efforts, I think, started on the east side first in East Harlem, but looking at the role that some services like Grubhub Seamless have played in kind of profiteering from this and help keep revenue coming into restaurants, even as they're extracting huge fees, we may need to look at alternative models for further enabling delivery and takeout from our local restaurants, not necessarily dining, because some of the existing solutions like Grubhub and Seamless may have been manageable when there was eat-in, but if they're the only option for carry-out and takeout, they're going to suck our local businesses dry. So, again, Assemblyman O'Donnell has kind of pioneered or done a lot of work around this to get restaurants in our area to be able to deliver without losing money to those fees. And I think it's something we need to consider as we're talking about making sure our restaurants survive, is not just what does reopening look like, but how can we make sure that, as Elazar said, financially, what they're able to do when they're open makes sense to them and they can still pay their bills.
Xavier Santiago, you're unmuted. Please proceed.
All right, thank you everyone for those comments. Within CV11, we've had several calls, including with Congressman Espaillat right before the second round of funding for PPP. At that time, we had lost approximately 43 businesses permanently. At this point in time, we're waiting for a new assessment to see what we can do, especially for our local restaurateurs. Many of them have adjusted very quickly. I want to applaud those that passed the legislation with Grubhub and others. I personally do not use those services, but for some, they don't have that possibility. I do think within East Harlem, we have areas that could be utilized more than streets, but it's whether or not we can make use of them. So for example, from the Urban Garden Center, that area, several of those blocks are utilized by NYPD, I think DOT and Department of Sanitation as well. That could be activated if we could get those agencies to cooperate with us. Tonight, I will bring this up during our executive committee meeting. On a final point to Councilmember Kalos, working as a producer in our industry, I've been up since 4:30 because I had calls with Europe as some productions are coming online. And if any of you have the time, you can Google the Hollywood Reporter released an article where Ava DuVernay and several others talked about how when they may be able to come online with productions as Governor Newsom is starting to open up counties. However, Los Angeles County, which I think would be a comparative district, it has not qualified yet. And many of my union crews, although we were able to get them paid for 2 weeks, they're now without work. And as was echoed earlier, we're looking at March 21 unless we see a resurgence. And so it's something to keep in mind. We're looking at other ways with our films, for example, to bring people back, whether it's through bringing them to stay at a hotel and self-quarantine for 16 days before going into production. But again, we need to sign off with the unions as well. So and for those that know, with our industry, we work in submarines. So we're in very tight quarters. So PPE and sanitization is not necessarily going to be productive. So that's just something I want to raise. But as more news comes forward, I will forward it. Thank you, Aldrin. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. We covered a lot of ground. We're just about finished. I'll turn it over to Gail Brewer to conclude. As we wrap it up, you know, I think a lot of resolutions, a lot of letters, a lot of work ahead. Manhattan as the country's most densely populated county, I think the governor, the mayor, and others will do well by listening to the voices of the community chairs and the borough president's office in this regard. We are the most densely populated county in the country, and this contagion breeds and festers on density. Density is a huge driver of this. Secondly, we're a borough of 1.65 million people that easily, based on other people's decisions, swells to 4 to 5 million people a day. So you know, there's a lot riding for the residents of this borough who live here, but also who have the responsibility of opening up and reimagining this borough for others who work here that swell our population to upwards of 5 million people. So I think that it's very important what you have to say. We certainly in our office take it very seriously, as I hope you know and feel, and has been demonstrated throughout the years. And then I'll just turn it over to our borough president for concluding remarks.
Thank you very much, Aldrin. What an impressive group of comments. I don't know that any other borough or even municipality would have that kind of quality. But it's really impressive. What we will do, I hope as a follow-up immediately, is to put it into some kind of a concise language that goes to each and every member of the governor and the mayor's teams, because they're working on all different levels. I'm on one of the committees on the governor with the other borough presidents, the unions, and Kathy Wild, but it's nothing compared to what you have offered. And then as time goes on and you have even more specifics, we'll follow up with more correspondence. It is heartening to be here. It's a very frightening future, and we never forget those many people who have passed away in our neighborhood, some of whom are community board members, as we know. And so I simply say thank you, and lots of work to be done. Thank you, Aldrin.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Oh, wait. Happy birthday to Barry. Happy birthday, Barry.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Happy
Happy birthday,
Thank you,
Barry.
everyone.
Happy
Hey,
birthday!
Barry.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
How are you going to top this?
Happy birthday.
It'll be
Bye
a hard
now.
one.
Stay Barry.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Bye now. Bye.